What does it take to go from being labeled a bust to one of the most feared players in playoff hockey? Because for years, Sam Bennett was that guy, the one drafted high with tons of hype, flashes of brilliance, but year after year, just didn't quite get to the top level. He's about to cash in on a massive new deal, and if you've watched the Florida Panthers or the playoffs at all, you already know that this guy is a total weapon. But how did we get here? How does one go from being an underwhelming, often criticized forward to the kind of player who can tilt an entire playoff series with nothing more than sheer willpower and chaos? Sam Bennett was never just average. Even at his lowest, he was always leaving behind hints. The edge, the grit, the relentless motor. There were always signs that he had something most players didn't. It just took the right environment and maybe a little bit of failure to unlock it. So today, we're telling the story of Sam Bennett. From the Kingston Frontenacs to Calgary Flames to Florida Panthers, a story of a perfect reclamation project and proving everybody wrong. This is how Sam Bennett became the NHL's biggest menace. Let's rewind back to 2014, before the beard, before the edge, before Bennett the Menace was known around the league. Back then, Sam Bennett was a star in the making. We're talking about one of the most hyped prospects in the draft. A kid who put up 91 points in 57 games with the Kingston Frontenacs. And he wasn't just padding stats on a stacked team. In fact, he was the team. He led Kingston in scoring by 21 points at 17 years old. Scouts were drooling over his offensive ability. He was slippery in tight spaces, he had great hands, a lethal shot, and he was smart as hell without the puck. He had that rare combo of elite offensive touch, but also the aggression. Bennett played like he had something to prove, even though he was torching everybody else on the ice. Many scouts called him the most competitive player in the draft. The same draft that had prospects like Aaron Ekblad, Leon Draisaitl, Sam Reinhart, all in the top 5. Central Scouting ranked him as the top North American skater, ahead of Aaron Ekblad, ahead of Leon Draisaitl, ahead of Sam Reinhart and Nikolai Ehlers. So the Calgary Flames were all in. They took him 4th overall, right behind Ekblad, Reinhart, and Draisaitl. The message was clear. This was going to be their guy. An offensive star they could add to players like Sean Monahan, Johnny Gaudreau, Mark Giordano, and more. But there was one weird thing about Sam Bennett, a story that somehow stuck harder than any of the scouting report ever did. At the NHL Combine, when he was asked to show how many pull-ups he could do, well, he couldn't. He couldn't do one. Now, to be fair, a lot of players come to the Combine underweight or with nagging injuries, but it didn't matter. That moment, that single detail became the storyline. And Bennett admitted the whole situation was a bit embarrassing for himself. And yet, in hindsight, that might have been the perfect metaphor for his early career. A player full of skill and promise, but not quite ready for the heavy lifting of the pros. But let's be clear, the talent was never in doubt. He had the tools, he had the motor, and even if he was a raw prospect, he was expected to blossom into a high-end scorer. A 70 to 80 point guy who could also punch you in the mouth if things got chippy. So what happened? How does a can't-miss prospect become a guy no one really wanted to talk about? Well, that's where the story really starts. If you're the 4th overall pick, your team expects you to be a piece that can carry the torch. They don't want production, they want identity. They want a franchise face. And the problem is, not every player is wired to thrive under that kind of spotlight. Let's start with the rookie year, because at first it looked very promising. Bennett put up 36 points in 77 games. Nothing earth-shattering, but enough to spark optimism. He was fast, he was gritty, he played with bite, he had flashes that reminded people why he was such a hyped prospect. But that spark never seemed to catch fire. In the seasons that followed, Sam Bennett didn't take the next step. He became the example of a high pick failing to deliver. He had 26 points in year 2, 26 points in year 3, 27 points in year 4, 12 points in the COVID-shortened season, and then 12 points in the season after in 38 games before the inevitable trade. Now that's not a slump, that's a 5-year pattern. A guy expected to develop into a first-line playmaker reduced to third-line minutes. Now, if you talk to Flames fans during those years, you'll hear the same thing. He plays hard, but he just can't get a bounce. And that's because effort was never the problem. Sam Bennett always showed up. He hit, he agitated, he dropped the gloves, he seemingly created, but the production just didn't follow. So here's where it gets a bit complicated. In a vacuum, 26 to 27 points from a bottom six forward is fine. But when you're the 4th overall pick, that's not just disappointing, it's bust territory. You're not being judged by your role. You're being judged by your draft slot. And every time someone like Leon Draisaitl exploded in Edmonton, it made Bennett look worse by comparison. That's the burden of expectations. You're not allowed to just be a decent player. You have to be great. And Bennett wasn't. At least not in the way people expected, and not at the time. Now, the advanced stats didn't match up. His expected goals were high. His shot share, again, was also high. It was just his finishing that was so below average. So long story short, what I'm saying is there were signs. He played with this raw recklessness that kinda can't be taught. The problem was, it just didn't translate into points. And in the NHL, points talk. By the time the 2020-2021 season rolled around, the writing was on the wall. It seemed like a mutually beneficial move that Bennett would move on from Calgary. And fans had split into two camps, those who still believed in his potential and those who were ready to cut ties. But what gets missed in all of this is that Sam Bennett wasn't failing because he didn't care, he was failing because the fit just for whatever reason was wrong. And for a player like Bennett, he needed the right system to fit in. He needed freedom, he needed an identity, and he needed trust from a team. And Calgary, regardless of all their efforts, it just wasn't going to be the place for him long term. So in April of 2021, the Flames made the call. They traded Sam Bennett and a 6th round pick to the Florida Panthers for Emil Heineman and a 2nd rounder. It wasn't a trade that made all the headlines, but what came next was a moment that changed everything. Because as soon as Bennett hit the ice in Florida, he didn't look like a misfit anymore. He looked like an absolute weapon. In his first 10 games as a Panther, he had 15 points. Now that's more than he had in the 38 games that season with Calgary. Same player, new system. Entirely different outcome. So what changed? Well, first off, the role. Florida didn't treat him like a reclamation project. They treated him like the player they knew he could become. Secondly, it was the fit. The Panthers weren't just a good team, they were the perfect team for a player like Bennett. They played fast, physical, and loose. They didn't suffocate creativity, they unleashed it. They thrived in the chaos, and Bennett is chaos incarnate. And finally, the system. Now, I'm not saying that the Flames held Bennett back, but Florida's system completely describes Bennett as a player. It let him crash the net, and it let him play that raw, emotional game that made him so effective as a prospect. The numbers didn't rebound, they skyrocketed to levels that Bennett had never seen in the NHL. In his first full season in Florida, Bennett scored 28 goals, which was by far a career high. He followed it up with seasons of 16 and 20 goals, while hovering around the 40 to 50 point range every year. But the real shift, the one that cemented Bennett's transformation, came in the postseason. Because as soon as the regular season was over, Sam Bennett became a different animal. And there's perhaps no greater example of this than the most recent Stanley Cup playoffs, where Sam Bennett was awarded with the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP. Another Stanley Cup and 15 goals in 23 games in the playoffs. Absolutely ridiculous output. You could go back and read reviews on the trades. People liked the bet for Florida, but nobody was saying that this would be a total needle mover one way or another. But it was Bennett's moment, and now years later, it's hard to imagine this Panthers team without him in the lineup. He seemed to finally find that finishing touch that had been lacking in Calgary, and he was generating chances at a high rate once again. This was the player Calgary thought they were getting. Even in seasons where his raw numbers dipped, like in 2022-2023 when he finished with just 40 points, the impact was still there. He stayed consistent in his role, he drove play, and he wore teams down. That season, as you likely remember, Florida made their miracle run to the Stanley Cup final, and Bennett was one of their best players the entire way. To be successful, you need a Sam Bennett. And that's why over the last few playoff runs, his value has skyrocketed. Now with free agency on the horizon, Sam Bennett looks like he's in for a massive raise, but it doesn't sound like he's leaving his situation in Florida. I mean, why would he? It's been perfect for him, and with the Panthers lineup, it doesn't look like that success is going to be ending anytime soon. For years, Bennett was judged by a standard that he didn't set. He was a 4th overall pick who couldn't do a pull-up. He didn't score enough, and he didn't live up to the hype of that draft pick. The league looked at him like someone who had already peaked before he even got started. But what if that version of Bennett, the one from Calgary, wasn't a failure? What if it was just a player in the wrong place at the wrong time? Because not every player fits into every system. Not every 18-year-old is ready to carry a franchise, and not every bust is actually a bust. Sometimes they're just in a bad situation. And suddenly, the guy who was once considered a bust became the kind of player that wins you playoff games. The kind that makes a difference when the lights are brightest, and the kind that brings Stanley Cups to your favorite team's city. So the next time you hear a player labeled a bust, maybe just think twice, because buried underneath that disappointment might be a playoff monster just waiting for the right team to unleash him. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also be sure to leave a comment down below, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.